Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I am joined here today with a very special guest, none other than Joseph Carrel, who is the author of More Than a Vampire. This is a book that I reviewed recently for the channel, and it is part of my series, kind of monthly thing that I like to do to talk about a self-published book and hopefully get a chance to discuss it with the author. So I'm very delighted to have Joseph here today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So it's always so much fun to talk with writers about the process of writing. And I think a lot of the people who pay attention to BookTube in general are probably writers themselves. So there's always a lot to learn. And we're a community. I like to think that we're a community that's very supportive of each other. And so I think that we enjoy hearing from fellow authors and hearing what they have to say, but also, as I said, learning from them. So this is a lot of fun. So we're going to begin our discussion today with some non-spoiler points. And then at the very end of the video or so, we'll probably get into some spoilers for More Than a Vampire. But of course, we will warn you before we do that. But the majority of the video is going to be non-spoiler. And so the first thing I'd like to ask you, Joseph, is I got the feeling that More Than a Vampire is part of a series that you're intending to write. Is that true?
Yes. When I came up with the concept, actually the main character, Simon, he's actually a side character to a short story that I wrote like 17 years ago.
Wow. Huh.
So I just started getting the itch. I mean, from your review, people who've read it, you'll notice that this is a cover for the Dresden Files, an alternative cover. And that's what kind of inspired me to get back into writing, as you kind of pinpointed out there in your video.
Yep, but I did mention Dresden Files, so I'm glad I was right about that. Then that's one of your inspirations. Then
yes, you actually were right about both of them because I went through The Witcher twice as well.
Good. I'm glad.
Like he's dead on. Yeah, he's pretty spot on with my influences and stuff. But yeah, I was thinking to myself, well, if I'm going to go and start this, I want to make sure I do it right. And I did a lot of research on YouTube with published authors and what makes them successful. And then as far as the series goes, I thought to myself, well, people like series are the big thing now. Like there's very little standalone books, and I mean very little trilogies even now, it seems. But I wanted to do something a little different. I wanted to create my own like shared universe, like Marvel and DC. I know you're a big comic book fan, and I thought to myself, RFK, kind of how he's like, well, some people look at things the way they are and ask why. Well, I think things that never were and ask why not. And I thought to myself, well, why hasn't anyone done something where you're not just it's not just about the world itself, it's about the characters in the world. And why can't you put out a novel-sized story for a character and then bounce to another character, build that character up, and then cross over at certain points and have cameos throughout books? That's
cool. Yeah, very cool. I love it. I think it's a great concept. So the book's going to begin with More Than a? Is that sort of the thing that's going to be the running theme?
Yeah, and now I'm trying to, as I release these books, do like title launches and stuff like that. So keeping it a little bit under wraps. But for the people who have bought the book, if you go to the back, you'll see what the name of the next book is actually going to be.
Yeah, I cheated. I looked. So
so it's kind of a payoff, for anybody who goes out and gets the first book. And that's kind of another thing I wanted to do. And I think that maybe Marvel, better than DC, has done this in the movies, at least. where you don't have to watch every single Marvel movie to when they do the big crossover to get it. And that's kind of how, you know, if you read the next book, you won't be lost if you didn't read the first book.
Uh-huh.
And then, but if you did read the first book, there's going to be some things in there that you're going to be like, oh, okay, all right, that's cool. And, you get little bonuses, and there's certainly going to be books where, you're going to want to have read the first book in that section, and different characters going to have their main books and stuff like that.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah, I love that. It's a great concept. Now, months ago, when you contacted me to see if I would be willing to read the book, and I think you gave me the title then, and I had the impression, okay, I haven't read much horror, and I thought because of the word vampire that I'd be reading a horror book, and it was interesting to me as I read. I thought, well, this is actually, is this? No, I don't think it. It could be described as a fantasy book. It could be described even as a bit of a romance book. So I was very interested in how very quickly this became sort of genre defying, that it's not possible to just pigeonhole this into, I'm not well read in horror, but I don't think this is a typical horror book at all. So it's very eclectic in that sense, right?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And it can be a good thing. Especially once it picks up traction, you start getting reviews coming in. Like I'm starting to get some reviews coming in now. It's good, but it's hard at the beginning because you want to be niche and push into that niche, right. And so people are like, oh, that's what I'm expecting, and it does have a love story in it, and then it is there's a lot of fantasy involved in it, and it's an adventure, but then again, it is dealing with vampires, and there are darker elements, especially as you go further into the book, that can put into the horror aspect. But
for sure,
and coming up with the book itself, a lot of people I was seeing online, a lot of people were like, they wanted, like, people who like vampires, but they want to see more of a vampire protagonist and stuff, and that kind of seemed how I put it together, and I think it comes out well, especially once you get into it. Then you're like, oh, okay, yeah, this is kind of, I can do this. Especially fantasy readers won't be alienated by it.
Very cool. Yeah, no, it's definitely, it was an easy book to pick up for a fantasy fan, for sure. Yeah. Interesting though, because there is a lot of, I guess, vampire lore out there. And how much research did you do when you were preparing to write the book? Did you read, Dracula by Bram Stoker? Did you read some of the old classics, that sort of thing to prepare?
Well, actually, I've just been a fan of vampires in general. Interview with a Vampire. Especially when I was a younger kid, watched all the vampire and werewolf movies, The Wolfman, and all that. Just recently, I actually read Carmilla, Dracula, Frankenstein. But a lot of it was just knowledge that I've kind of gotten over the years, and then, because what I wanted to do with vampires specifically is I wanted to keep what people like about vampires, the base of what a vampire is, and then just add some extra stuff. And I wanted to make my vampires more biological and just a little bit magical, but more, there's a reason why they can do these things. And to kind of explain it to people, how they can hypnotize you and why you feel comfortable around vampires, and they're it builds up why they're predators, and what makes them so good at it.
Yeah, they're fascinating in general. I think they're about, essentially, vampires seem to be about sex and death, right? About Eros and Thanos, right? And they sort of intertwine those elements in ways that are very interesting and very primal, I guess, right?
Yeah. And I mean, once you kind of read the book, it kind of explains why they came into existence in the first
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so then I kind of just try to build off of that.
Huh. Very cool. Well, from there, I think we have a good segue. You already mentioned Dresden Files. That's I think a good one that we can talk about for a moment, but also The Witcher. What are some of your inspirations and influences? And this could also, by the way, be other than literature as well. What somebody wanting to approach this book, what are the building blocks from your mind that went into this from your various sources of inspiration and influence?
Yeah, if I'm trying to give people a pitch of kind of what it, because they always want to know, like, oh, what's it like? Like, what can you compare it to?
Yeah.
And I mean, you did a great job with, it influenced, by The Witcher and then, Dresden. But also, if you've ever seen the Underworld movies, kind of, kind of underpinning the social construct and
Cool.
politics in general. But
Yeah.
so that's kind of the match for this book and the vampire cabals in general.
Oh, cool. So that's where the politics, kind of the various cabals that are against each other, and that's where that's kind of coming from too, I guess.
They never really flushed them out too much in the movies. But I just think, like, well, that's a good idea. And,
yeah.
Well, how could you flush that out more and make it kind of believable? And there's a reason for them, and there's a reason for them being where they're at.
Cool.
But, as far as like influences, of course, Jim Butcher, Sapkowski, but also Michael Crichton was a big influence on me. And kind of the way he never really pigeonholed himself into serious. He was one of those one and done type guys. And I always thought to myself, how does he come up with such great ideas over and over again?
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of the influences where I'm kind of gonna, we're gonna bounce around this world with different characters, but especially, the Eaters of the Dead.
Yeah.
My favorite books in high school. Just White Beowulf. I mean, that's just one of my favorite things. And I knew as I was reading that book, I was like, this is so familiar. This is so familiar to. And then I was like, and then I went into research, and it's like, oh yeah, it's basically his retelling of Beowulf.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Which in turn was turned into a film, The 13th Warrior.
Warrior, Antonio Banderas.
Yeah.
And I actually enjoyed the movie even more because I'm like, oh, okay, I get, you can visualize it now the way you saw it, and then, I actually think it's kind of an underrated movie. I mean, not Oscar worthy or anything, but it was a fun time.
I liked it actually. I liked it, especially the first part of it.
The first part is the discovery of it, how he learns the languages and stuff.
Yeah, that's cool. That's the scene that everyone talks about, where he's on the boat and he's gradually hearing more of the words, or the subtitles are in English rather than Old Norse, and then he surprises them all when he starts speaking in Old Norse. So
yeah. Then they're like, "How did you learn our language?" It's like,
it's pretty iconic, that scene. Yeah, so cool. Any other influences before I move on to the next question that you feel are really important for you, just your inspiring you to try to write and be an author?
Yeah, definitely. I was inspired at growing up with the Batman anime from the early 90s. How, I mean, it was it was kids, but it was darker. There was a lot more story into it rather than like Spider-Man was. Spider-Man was really bright and easy and stuff. But I was, Batman was always my favorite, comic book growing up, just because I thought he had the best story writing in it. And then, of course, X-Men. I know we commented back and forth a little bit about that. Stan Lee, I mean, no one builds better characters, and that's kind of was a big influence in how you can put, characters together. And like I said, cross them over and have them, meet each other. But
Yeah.
yeah, those are huge for my fundamentals.
Very cool. Now, this could be a potentially embarrassing question for someone in your life, but were there any characters you based on real people in the book?
Well, as far as where you were talking about the banter between Lena and Simon, that's
Yeah.
100% me and my wife.
Yeah,
100%.
I actually suspected that. Yeah, that's cool. That's really nice. And that was one of my favorite aspects of the book, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just and then growing up, me and my friend, my best friend Nathan, it's just there's a lot of stuff like that where you and your friends are just kind of bantering back and forth against each other, and especially with a book like this, I want, and in most of my books, because they're gonna all be deviations into the dark fantasy genre. They're gonna be a little bit more real, more raw, but you've got to break those stories up. Like when you were you Nate, you were doing the archetypes for the jester, and I always tell people you got to have one of those characters in every book to lighten things up, so it's not so dim all the way through. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that playfulness. And because I think as writers, what we try to do is reflect life, and life is full of both tragedy and joy, and it's full of sorrow and happiness. So to not have those in a book, especially one that's a bit darker, I think is a disservice to the book in a way, because you miss that aspect. And in a way, having that in there deepens the experience of the more difficult moments too. So yeah, I was very glad to see that in there. Yeah.
Well, and also you want everybody, because everybody knows somebody like that, and they're like, that's that's my friend, or we definitely do that all the time, and it kind of keeps you involved and wanting to read more, and especially if you see yourself in it, you're like, oh, okay, that and it pushes you forward.
Yep, for sure. That is for sure. So let's talk about, I'm going to ask you a very broad question, and you can take it wherever you want. But what have you learned from this process of writing this book and going through and self-publishing? And now you're, of course, probably in a sort of a marketing stage, I guess. What lessons have you learned? What can you share with the viewers?
I definitely would say that if you are even hinting at a possibility of writing a book, and you want to publish it, something it's not just something for yourself, but you want others to experience it, you have to start on social media somewhere. I mean, whether it's starting a YouTube channel, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you got to get started, and you got to get started yesterday. Because a lot of people think, especially I noticed this as I've got on Twitter, is some people just want to write and then just throw the book out there, and it's an amazing book. It's the best written book you'll ever see.
Yeah.
But if nobody knows it's there, nobody's going to read it. It's if you're traditionally published, you can do that. You can just
even now, I think even traditionally published authors nowadays have to be, even very established ones are heavily encouraged to be active on social media. So I think even there, you're going to have to put on your marketing hat and get on social media. Yeah.
Yeah, it's especially starting out too, because there's a lot of, in the traditional published world, there's a lot of like kind of unwritten rules. Certain sizes of books aren't getting picked up if you've never been published before, and along those lines. But you have to have some kind of presence to get at least kick the ball rolling once you start your publishing career. And of course, the biggest thing, and I knew this coming in, that you have to get, a professional editor, but also, things things don't always work out, especially if you put a deadline on yourself.
Uh-huh.
I'm one of those people. If I'm going to do something, I'm going all the way in on it. I'm going to schedule things, and I'm going to try to make it as as structured as possible.
Yeah.
But then once you do that, the problem is, certain things aren't going to work out right. Whether it's, getting an editor, getting it finished in time, formatting, cover art. And so you got to give yourself time and get a head start on, on everything. And another thing I learned is be prepared to spend more than you think you're going to have to spend.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially if you do intend to use an editor, that costs thousands of dollars. If you use a real professional editor, you could end up spending way more on that than you would ever make on the book. Yeah.
Everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's different types of editors. I mean, there's certain editors that like, if you know where you want your story going and you use beta readers, you can kind of get away from the developmental editor.
Yes.
If you use enough beta readers and have enough people that can give you real feedback as you trust that are gonna, tell you. And this is something, going forward, with myself, is you can't skimp out at all on the copy editor. So
copy editing is a big deal. Yeah. And it's not cheap either. Yeah. Yeah. So the grammar. So if anyone doesn't know what copy editors do, they go through, fix the commas and all that stuff. And on a sentence by sentence level. And it's tedious and time consuming. So that's why it's so expensive. But
and because a lot of people, and I was doing a lot of research, so I knew that things were going to cost money coming in more than most people.
Yeah.
But you kind of come in and you're like, all right, well, this is going to be my budget, at least for this. So I was trying to be the most efficient dollar for dollar that I could with what I could afford. But a lot of people are just shocked. I mean, some people were shocked at what I spent, and I was like, well, if that shocks you, be prepared if you want to go in, and because some people are like, well, I want to do this and this, and I want to put pictures in the book, and I would have loved, and maybe in the future that'll be a thing, map, because I know people love maps, and I've even had beta readers like, oh, are you gonna put maps in it? Because I'd love to see this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, maybe down the line that'll be something, but it is so expensive to put all those things in. But yeah, that's a big thing. Just do your research, and especially if you're younger, and maybe you're in high school, college, or whatever, take your time with it. Make it as good as you can make it, and save up as much as you can, so the editors can get through it as fast. Because I won't lay it all out on my editors, because this was my first attempt, and I'm sure it was all messed up when they were starting with it. And that's another thing I've learned in this process, is the more you write, the better you get at it. I mean, I've already written the second book, and you can just tell, even getting towards the end of of More Than a Vampire, you could feel yourself getting better, and things were flowing better and stuff. So that's one thing as I continue to write, I'm going to continue to sharpen my skills and hone the craft as well, so it won't be as hard on editors. But probably the biggest thing for myself is you're just gonna have to put more money into it than you probably want to start off with.
Yeah. To go the self-publishing route means spending a lot of money up front. I think there are advantages, of course, too. You have more control over creative decisions, for one. That's the big one to me, anyway. But I think it's what you said is actually really important. So I want to repeat it, is that you're not going to learn how to write if you don't go for it, and so you've got to just get out there and do it. And you have to, your first efforts are going to be not your best, probably, because you're going to spend time, and you'll feel like you said, you feel yourself getting better at it. It's like any skill, like anything you do. If you work out, you get bigger muscles, the same thing with writing. So to go out and go for it. And that's the only way you're ever going to get good at it, is to just do it. So
yeah, I mean, and especially if you're thinking about, trying to get, if people were like trying to get into self-publishing, it's kind of like, I will say, uh, money can help you out a lot in that. It's kind of like you play tennis.
yep.
So, I played tennis in high school, and it's kind of like, if I was gonna describe it to people, it's like, well, traditionally published people, they're like the guy or the kid who got sent off to tennis school.
Yeah, in Florida.
Yeah, in Florida. So they come back in like, oh, everything's really, it's pretty crisp. Maybe they're not the most dynamic, but they have everything in a row.
Right.
And then you get the self-published person who has a lot of money to throw in. They're the person with the big serve that's just really athletic.
Yeah.
Just come in and just blow the serve out of water. And then if you don't have a lot of money, you have to learn, you have to learn the drop shots and the slices and
Yep.
how to maneuver around things. But anybody, if you want it enough, you just got to put in the time, to your writing, to your research. And I know you were talking about, doing research for the book. And
yeah,
when I read a book or I watch a movie, I'm one of those people who, if I find something interesting, I'm like, well, that's an interesting little thing there. And I'm like, is it real? Is that what, or did they just make that up completely? And then I have to go online and look it up. And a lot of my friends are that way. We're really similar. And so when I put things into the book, I did a lot of research because, a lot of it's set in the 1600s, 17th century.
Yeah.
Like, well, I got to make sure that all these towns and all these cities were around when putting these down, because you as well as I know, like the internet will find, if someone's interested, like, Boston wasn't a city until 1632. What do you,
Right.
Right. But I also feel like that's a little bit of a bonus for authors who do that, who actually do the research to go out and find what were things called in certain times, like what was a, what kind of death was it called back then, and people who really get into that, they appreciate, oh, he knew what he was talking about,
Yeah.
But yeah, I just love getting into the research aspect of things and like really pulling things up, especially because I'm a big history buff. And that's another reason why I enjoy your channel so much, is anything that has to do with history, especially ancient history, is right up my alley. I can't stop reading or watching it.
Yeah, oh, it's great. I think that there are a lot of us fantasy fans who are also history fans. There seems to be some kind of an overlap there. So yeah, I think because fantasy is essentially backward looking, and a lot of great fantasy gives the sense of history, gives the layers, gives the sense that this place has been lived in for a long time, and we like that. A lot of us fantasy fans like that sort of thing, and you took the trouble to do that as well in More Than a Vampire. You established a sort of an ancient history behind things before you get into the actual story. So that's kind of a cool fantasy move there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring in characters from fiction and from mythology.
Yeah.
And also not only bring in people that we know, or gods, or myths that people know. I wanted to bring in some little known, or not as hyped up mythologies and folklore and bring it into the limelight for people. And I've already had people that were, because I love Native American folklore.
Yeah, that's in there for sure. Yeah.
I've had people that are like, "Whoa, I didn't know about this," or "I did know about this," and it's so great that you're putting that in, into the book.
Yeah. Very cool. Because the book is, I mentioned this in my review, that it's a pretty broad scope. You have a European setting, but you also go to parts of Africa and you go to North America, so in the 17th century primarily. So there's some really cool elements that you bring in there that, and I think you're right, that are probably realms that could be more explored in fantasy. Absolutely. So yeah, very cool. So one other thing I did want to talk about too is the cover of the book, which I think is very striking. And just hold it up a little close there so people can see what it looks like. What's the story behind the cover? Where did you help come up with this concept, or the art? Where'd this come from?
Yeah, so as a fantasy reader that wants to get into writing, of course, you have huge ideas of, oh, the cover, I want the cover to look like this and this and this. And I got into it and I started thinking to myself, like, well, that's too much. That's too much on the cover. And even outside of Christ, because I had this this big thing I wanted to do, and I thought to myself, well, there's a lot of covers that have these wide, huge pictures on the front, portraits and all this. And so I thought to myself, like, well, what do I like? What do I think stands out? And I've always loved high quality pencil art or ink art. And I just, being on Twitter, I just kind of put it out there, questions like, does anybody know anybody? And I just happened to be friends with this guy, Matthew Allen Bond. And I give him credit in there.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, yeah, this is some of my work and some of the stuff I've seen. And because I wanted something completely custom, completely original.
Yeah.
And I feel like, readers can really see that when they look at a book cover. They can be like, okay, that's just Photoshop, or just somebody slapped it. That doesn't mean that what's in the book is any less. But I feel like if you take pride and you really put something really nice on the cover, they're more, because they say don't judge a book by their cover, but a lot of people will, or it'll get you in the door, especially on like on Amazon. They have the look inside feature where you can kind of get inside, so people enjoy, like, oh, well, that's a different cover. And I kind of told him what I was thinking, with the sword and the hand.
Okay.
And if you, in the beginning, you'll know, once you get into the book, you'll know why the scar is there.
Yeah.
And I just kind of gave him a little bit of basics, but I seen his work and I was like, I want you to have the freedom to kind of come up with your own vision of what you see outside of the base. Mm-hmm. And so my idea was the hand, the sword, and it coming down the way it was, but then everything else was from his mind. And I don't have any artistic skill in that way, so it just blew me away as he was continuing, But the one thing I really told him was like, I just want just a little bit of color in it, just enough to draw the eye.
Yep. Yeah. And it really worked out. I'll hold it up again. There is a sort of a gothic element to it. And of course it's vampire related. So the font of, the words and everything. And also just the lines that he gave it, and it's black and white. So there's a starkness to it that I really like, but also just the border decorations and everything. It gives off a very gothic vibe. And I love the color. Of course, it's red, it's blood, right? Which it's a vampire book. So yeah.
Yeah. So touch.
Yeah, yeah, it's perfect. It's really great. Yeah, it came out really great. So yeah, that worked out really well, I would say.
Yeah, and he came up with the font for the spine, and it reminds me of the '70s comic book. You know,
Oh
how.
yeah.
But yeah, he does. I think he also does graphic novels too. So
Uh-huh. I can see exactly what you're saying. It definitely, yeah, definitely gives off that vibe. And that's cool because you mentioned the comics as a source of inspiration as well. So that's awesome. Well, that's fantastic. So I think this is the point where I'm going to warn the viewers that we're going to talk some spoilers because I do want to talk about a couple of the big characters here, namely Simon and Lena, especially. We might even talk a little about that background that I alluded to, but I really want to get to them. So if you have not yet read the book, thank you so much for stopping by and listening to me and to Joseph talk about the book. And where can people, they can buy this on Amazon? Is that where you would steer
yeah,
people?
for right now, it's all on Amazon, hardcover, paperback, and ebook. And if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can pick it up for free. So.
Okay. Wow. Cool. Very cool. All right. So thank you so much, everyone who is leaving. And you and I, Joseph, are going to talk about Simon first, I think, because he's obviously the heart of the book, isn't he?
Yes, yes. This is, and the way I wanted to set this book up is I just wanted it to be him kind of telling his story. You know,
Yes.
it's I didn't. I mean, obviously there's a plot, and like you said, it all kind of comes together towards the end.
Yeah.
But I just wanted it to be a character thing. I wanted them to just be it's his story as you're kind of going through Simon's life, basically from 1639, for the next 57 years or so.
Yeah. Yeah. The choice of a first person narrator. There are advantages and disadvantages, obviously, to that. The big advantage is that you really get to know that character. You get to know the character has this voice that you gradually feel as part of the character in the story. So that's important, and it helps you give a rich central character, obviously, right? That is a huge advantage to the first person narrator, and especially when it's done really well. The risks are, of course, this character doesn't necessarily know what's going on in other characters' heads, right? Yeah. So you lose that omniscience, you lose the ability to completely. Now you can use that to your advantage as an author too, right? Because that can give an element of suspense. You don't know what's going on with Lena, most of the time because Simon doesn't know. So,
and that was a big thing as I was going through with my beta readers. And you give them a few chapters at a time, and then you get feedback. And some of them, you love to hear what their thoughts are, what they think's going to happen. And they're like, "Oh, is she going to turn on him? Is she actually the bad guy?" Because of course, in first person, you don't know. You only know what he knows, and that's what I wanted to come across, and that's why I feel like in first person, you can get to get into the feelings, and you can be closer to the character that way. Yeah. As you said, it does kind of hurt a little bit. You have to try a little bit harder when it comes to descriptions of the environment, mm-hmm. and the world building in general. Yeah. You don't, if you try too hard, it'll sound weird because he's talking, right? So, right. Someone walks in a room, they're not looking at every little piece and the nook and cranny of a window.
That's right. That's right.
But yeah, I just wanted to get the readers closer to the character.
Yeah, for sure. And if he's a character who's going to be a recurring character, and that will have payoff down the line when you're in a book where he isn't the central character. So that's kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And kind of as we alluded to earlier, as we do crossovers and stuff, people will be more excited to see him because so much about him, and much about their personality. So if you see him or another character, in another book, you're like, oh, I know how he's going to feel about this situation. And,
Yeah. Yeah. Because you know his history and all of that. There is one moment that was kind of cool too in here where you break that narration and you have Lena be the narrator. And it's sort of a story within the story kind of thing where she's telling a story and then we're kind of hearing her voice tell that story. So that was kind of cool too. That was an interesting move there.
yeah, I wanted to pull her in to the story a little bit more and get her perspective. And also in that section, it gives you a closer view of Mont and how she deals with things and what the inner working of her cabal is a little bit.
Yeah.
And also that builds her up more as the big bad, or in this, because if you don't get close enough to her, then she's just going to be more generic. And I wanted her to be, the reader to be fearful of her and be fearful for Lena and Simon.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. So yeah, we do get a bit of another person's perspective, importantly, and it's kind of nice to have her Lena's voice in there for a bit as well. So very nice. But back to Simon. You mentioned the archetype stuff that I've been doing with AP Canada, and we had a lot of fun with that. And I think Simon kind of fits a couple of these archetypes a bit, right? I think of him as a bit of a rogue in a way. Is that fair? Would you say?
Yeah. And I know you compared him to kind of the Harry Dresden type, where he's within the cabal, and he wants to do, he's invested in it, but then also he has his conscience still,
right?
And in this world, a lot of times, as any supernatural being kind of ages, they kind of lose that. But he's, holding on to his conscience more as he ages, and he only wants to go so far, and he still has things that he's willing to protect more than your average, vampire or supernatural entity in the book.
Yeah, because he's a bit of a maverick just by disposition. But also I think his involvement with Lena is a factor there as well, where he's kind of able to see things outside of the perspective of his cabal a little bit. And so that's important. So he becomes a bit of a misfit, really, doesn't he? I mean, where he's breaking rules here and there, and he's getting himself in deeper and deeper trouble with just about everybody. So that's a Harry Dresden kind of thing, right? Where he is getting in trouble with the White Council, and he's getting in trouble with the Red Court of the Vampires, and he's getting in trouble with, and it's like he's stepping, not even intentionally sometimes, but he's stepping on some of the boundaries and things that you're supposed to respect. So, and he's doing it for good reasons, though. He's got a good heart. That's the thing about the rogue, right?
Yes.
So they misbehave, but there's a good heart, and there's usually good reasons for it.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't want to, because the, morally gray area is done a lot, but I wanted him to still be a little bit warmer than that.
Yeah.
I wanted him to still have a little bit more heart than that throughout the book. And, things, and also, in the book, it progressively, you might say it progressively gets worse for him, or he progressively gets darker. And and that was my big inspiration for using this character, because initially in the story I wrote 17 years ago, he was a villain, and I wanted to kind of explore the why did he get to that point. And now things changed over the course. Only my best friend as well, and maybe some people back in high school have read that short story that I wrote.
Yeah.
So no one's going to see that, so they won't know exactly about it. But yeah, I wanted to kind of like, well, what could get you to go that direction? What could turn you, And so that's kind of this, that was kind of the base of when I started writing the story, because when I write, I think about a character,
Mm-hmm.
and the kind of character I want to write, and then immediately I either see the first line of of the novel, or I see the first scene. And I'm like, this is how I want to introduce the character.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I have that in my mind, I see the ending.
Huh.
And I'm like, okay, this is how it's going to end for them. And then I have to kind of, because I'm more of a pantser than I am a plotter, but
Uh-huh.
I in the beginning I know the end, and then what I do is I kind of bullet point 6 or 7 things, and I'm like, either this is a person I want them to meet, or this is the place they need to go in the
Yeah.
story, and then I fill in the way through.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Because Simon does go to some very dark places, even before the ending, when he's trying to get back to Lena, and he knows she's been captured, and he has that whole period when he really lets out the beast, right? And that's pretty distressing. But I'm imagining that the ending of the book is going to shatter him, I would think, and that when I see him again, it's going to be a darker character. That playfulness that was part of his character might have been crushed. I think, I don't know, because I haven't read the next book yet. But you can't tell anyone. So, but I'm guessing that this is going to be what happens at the end of the book, especially in regard to Lena. And we're doing spoilers now, so it's got to rip him apart, I would think, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and another thing, and I love getting feedback from people who've read it, and they're just like I can't believe you did that. That's
Yeah, yeah,
crazy. And another big thing in here is like everything I do, I and honestly, I already have the first probably 6 books that I'm going to do already
yeah.
thought out. I have the second book written. I don't just do things to do things.
Right, right.
And I know some people were just like, oh, we'll just kill off characters just to kill them and just to make a big scene. But there's a reason all things happen. And yeah, I mean, it's gonna crush him, and he's not gonna be the same the next time we see him. I mean, you'll see an evolution in the character. You'll still recognize him, of course,
Uh-huh.
but there will be changes, and whenever is his next time for his next story,
Yeah.
you know evolve throughout that book. But yeah, you were talking about there's a part in the book where he kind of just lets the predator out of himself,
Yeah.
and I think we, especially everybody, but especially men, at some point, if you hit a low spot in your life, you kind of get to that point where you're just you want to just vent and just let everything out. Well, this him being a vampire can take it to the next. He takes it to the next level.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a tension, I think, throughout, because you have these vampires who've organized themselves into a kind of civil society, and there are rules, and Simon's job is an enforcer of those rules, ironically, right? Um, so you have this tension because, particularly when they're young, I guess the vampires have a tendency to want to let out that predator, but that leads to bad things in terms of human interactions, and there is a sense of decency among vampires too. They seem to have a morality, their own kind of morality that exists. So there's a tension between that beast inside the predator and the decent moral side, I guess. And you really see that happen with poor Simon when he's thrown into this situation, right?
Yes, and the a big thing, like I said, especially within the amongst themselves, there's a very civil society that they've built. But again, I wanted to keep the things that people like about vampires. And I know, if you've ever read or watched 30 Days of Night, people like when vampires can be that predator.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to show that side too of, when they become unhinged, but also it's a way for me to get you even closer with his character when he pulls back and finds himself again. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And of course, at this point, he finds himself in opposition to his friends, the group that he served with in Negrum Gladio, where now he's going to be pursued. So ironically, he's looking at this organization from the other side. Where he was the enforcer, now he's on the run. So yeah, and you can feel the tension and the tragedy of that situation too, of course, because they don't want to have to hurt their friend, but at the same time they have an obligation to, don't they?
Yeah, it's and I always feel like that's a story that um again, people get pulled into, brother versus brother.
Yeah.
And the system is pushing you against each other. It's not necessarily you. Like you said, they don't want to hunt him and he doesn't want to hurt them in defense of what he has to do. But this it's just the way the system is put together that kind of makes everybody, run into each other.
Yep. Yep. So let's finish by talking about Lena, I guess. And for me, as I said before, the dynamic between Simon and Lena is in some ways kind of the heart of the book. And that relationship, I think, humanized him in many ways for me, because there was that playfulness that was a lot of fun, but also the vulnerability involved in when you fall in love with someone, that you're opening yourself up, aren't you?
Yeah.
So, but her character also was a cool character. She was a lot of fun to get to know, and there was, I think, an initial kind of mystery because they're on these other sides of this these cabals there's a Cold War, I think, going on between the four cabals of a sort, isn't there?
Yes, and that's another thing with the beginning of the book. I wanted to give people backstory without it feeling too info dumpy. I wanted to give them a story in the not just here's the information. I wanted to kind of give a story with it, and also so as time goes on, you can see why they don't like each other, what has happened in the past,
right?
Who controls where, and that can also, that also comes into play in the book too, about areas that he goes to.
Yeah. And
But
transfers of power and all that. Yeah.
yeah, and and with Lena, I wanted people to, see her make Simon better as a
Yeah.
as a person, and also, like you said, see his vulnerabilities. Because honestly, I purposely tried not to make him overpowered,
Mm-hmm.
in the story, and at least for a while, I'm not going to have any of my characters be this just overpowered person that can just run through anything. He fails in times in the book, multiple times.
Yeah.
You know, but I feel like people will connect more with him as you see him fail and be picked back up. And Lena is the one that picks him up several times. But also, I think it's great to see her bounce off of his friends as well.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Especially her interactions with Ratfinger.
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of people seem to like those aspects, and that's kind of you'll get that a lot as a man. When you first get together with your spouse, she has to learn to deal with your friends as well, and it's always fun to kind of see how that works out.
Right. Right. Especially if you have friends like Rattenfinger. Yeah. So yeah, no, he was fun. I liked him and the other various folktale elements in there. There were some, cool allusions there to various folktale characters and stuff of that nature. So that adds a bit of fun to the story as well. But it is sort of tragic where it ends. This is not a happy ending, is it?
No, and uh, and that's kind of why I guess technically it can't be labeled a romance, because apparently
Right.
the Romance Writers Society says if it doesn't end happily ever after,
Yeah.
or happily ever after, or possibly, happy, it can't be considered a romance.
You're disqualified then,
I
Joseph.
disqualified myself at the end.
Yeah. Oh dear. And I wonder too how much upset you've heard expressed about this ending from your readers, your various readers.
Yeah, it was odd, like especially the beta readers. They were like, I can't believe you did that. You killed her.
Yeah.
But they also said that it was, it was a great way to end it, and because I wanted, I had that thought in my head as of what can turn a person darker, or turn a person potentially into a villain.
Yeah.
How can you end that? And also to kind of show people that he's not this overpowered person that can always save the day.
Right.
It's there are forces in this world that are just insurmountable, and you have to learn to not get tied up in their web.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, it is a compelling ending, I would say. And it makes me want to read more books in the more than a series. So I'll be curious to see what Simon looks like in the future, for sure. So
Yeah, the next book I'm shooting for an April release.
oh
So,
wow, okay, that's not too far away then. Yeah,
yeah.
nice.
So like I said, I've learned a lot. So I kind of know where I need to tighten things up at, and so hopefully this next book will be a lot more polished. And if everything works out perfectly, it'll be an April, October release. I'm gonna try to do 2 books a year.
Awesome.
So,
That's fantastic. Well, I wish you the very best with your writing and with this series and with everything else. And I look forward to reading these future books. And thank you so much, Joseph, for coming on to the channel and having this chat with me. I've enjoyed this thoroughly.
yeah, I appreciate you having me on, and I'll continue watching in the future. I'm sure we'll talk in the future.
That's for sure. All right. Thanks so much. And bye, everyone. Thanks for watching.